The desert wind brushed over Caleb Morgan's cheeks as he dismounted near his corral, the evening sky burning red and gold. He hadn't expected company, much less the kind that made the earth itself seem nervous. The first tremor was faint, like distant thunder. The second was unmistakable, heavy, rhythmic, approaching. When he turned, he froze. Two towering Apache sisters, each nearly 7 feet tall, stood at the fence line. Their shadows stretched long in the dying light. One of them clutched her stomach, breaths shallow, while the other planted a massive spear into the earth as if warning the land itself. Caleb swallowed hard and raised his hands slightly, palms open. Fear rippled through him, but something else rose stronger. Instinct, decency, the simple understanding that hunger didn't care about size or tribe. He gently lowered the sack of grain from his shoulder and placed it between them. "This land is harsh," he said quietly. "If you need food, take it." The sisters exchanged a cautious glance. The guard's eyes narrowed, testing him. Finally, with a slow nod, the wounded sister stepped forward and accepted a handful, eating as though every grain mattered. The taller sister watched him closely, her face unreadable. Caleb didn't move. He understood animals, storms, and the moods of the sky, but these women were something else entirely, not threats, not monsters. Just survivors shaped by a world that demanded more strength than most men possessed. When the sun dipped below the ridge, he lit a small campfire near the corral. "You're safe to rest here," he murmured. "No trouble from me." To his surprise, the sisters settled by the flames, still wary but no longer on the edge of fight. The wounded sister leaned closer to the heat, warming her hands larger than Caleb's entire forearm. Her breathing steadied, and for the first time, her features softened. The taller one, though silent, studied Caleb with sharp intelligence. After a long moment, she spoke, her voice deep but steady. "Why give food to strangers, to giants?" Caleb shrugged, poking at the fire. "Hungry is hungry, doesn't matter the size of the person carrying it." She tilted her head slightly, as though cataloguing his answer for later. Trust, Caleb realized, wasn't something they gave easily. Night settled thickly across the desert. Coyotes howled in the distance, and the fire painted the sisters in flickering shade. Ubluus, warriors built like myth, but tired in a way only real hardship could carve into a person. Caleb brought water from his well and set it near them. They drank slowly, gratefully. The wounded sister whispered something in Apache. The taller one translated, "She says you have a good spirit." Caleb nodded awkwardly, unsure how to respond. It wasn't often someone described him that way. Mostly he was known as the quiet rancher who kept to himself, asking little and offering even less. As the sisters rested, Caleb leaned against the porch post and watched the stars. A strange peace settled over him, not fear, not discomfort, but an understanding that fate had put him in this moment for a reason he couldn't yet name. The wounded sister eventually remained asleep, though her shoulders lowered slightly, as if allowing herself a rare moment of calm. "My name is Naira," she said at last. "My sister is Loma. We were separated from our people after a raid from the north." Caleb listened quietly as she spoke. Naira's voice held strength, but beneath it was the fatigue of someone who had been surviving on instinct alone for too long. Their tribe had scattered in the chaos. The sisters had traveled for days without food, protecting each other through storms, rocky passes, and nights where cold bit deeper than fear. "We thought we would die out here," Naira admitted. Caleb stared into the fire and answered softly, "Not tonight." She studied him again, and her gaze softened, not fully trusting, but no longer suspicious. The hours crawled toward midnight. The fire crackled, and the desert air grew colder. Caleb offered them blankets, though they looked almost comically small over their enormous frames. Still, Loma pulled hers close, her earlier pain replaced by slow, steady breaths. Naira shifted slightly, her spear resting across her lap, but no longer held in threat. Caleb realized he was no longer afraid. Instead, he felt a strange protectiveness, an instinct to shield these women who could likely crush him with one hand. But strength, he understood, wasn't only measured in muscle. When dawn approached, the desert turned pale blue and silver. Caleb stretched, walked to the porch, and inhaled the crisp morning air. That was when he heard the earth trembling again. But this time it wasn't 2 sets of footsteps, it was hundreds, maybe more. The sound rolled across the plains like a storm swallowing the horizon. Caleb's heart hammered. Naira rose instantly, gripping her spear. Loma, though still weak, stood beside her sister. "They come," Naira whispered. "Our people." Caleb stepped onto the open ground, breath thick in his chest. The rising sun revealed them, an ocean of Apache warriors, mounted, armed, and painted for battle. They formed an immense circle around Caleb's ranch, hooves pounding, dust rising like smoke from the earth. 700 warriors, maybe more, closed in with slow, deliberate precision. Caleb inhaled sharply. His ranch seemed infinitely small in the middle of that living storm. Naira stepped forward, towering beside him. Some warriors gasped at the sight of her and Loma alive. Others stared at Caleb with expressions unreadable, part shock, part suspicion, part something far older. A broad-chested elder, wearing a feathered mantle and war markings, rode forward from the circle. His eyes moved from the sisters to Caleb. Silence thickened between them. Naira spoke first, her voice ringing across the dust. He fed us. Without him, we would not be standing here." The elder's gaze sharpened. Warriors murmured among themselves. He felt like a single tree facing a wildfire, but he didn't step back. Whatever this moment required of him, he would meet it. The elder dismounted, walking slowly toward Caleb. His expression held neither anger nor gratitude, only the weight of a man measuring another man's soul. He stopped a few feet away. "You helped daughters of our tribe," he said. "Few would risk such a choice." Caleb swallowed, but stood firm. "They needed food. Anyone would have done the same." Naira shook her head. "Not anyone." Loma nodded weakly in agreement. The elder looked at the sisters, then at Caleb, as if seeing something rare, perhaps something needed. After a long, quiet breath, the elder spoke again. "A man who gives without fear gives from truth. Our people honor such truth." He lifted his hand. The 700 warriors lowered their weapons. The tension loosened like a rope cut clean. Caleb exhaled, not realizing he'd been holding his breath. Naira placed a hand, massive, warm, steady, on his shoulder. "You saved us," she said. "Now our people owe you a debt." Caleb blinked, stunned. He'd expected death, not honor. He'd expected judgment, not respect. As the morning brightened, warriors approached with food, furs, and supplies, gifts of gratitude. Loma stepped beside him, her smile faint but real. "You gave when we had nothing," she said. "We will not forget." Caleb felt something tighten in his throat, something he hadn't expected. In a world where he lived alone, where the land rarely gave more than it took, this moment felt like a bridge between worlds. Not because he sought reward, but because kindness had echoed further than he ever imagined. When the warriors eventually rode off, the land returned to stillness. Naira and Loma lingered a moment longer. "We will return," Naira said, "not out of duty, but because we now walk the same road." Caleb watched them go, the desert stretching wide before them. He stood there long after they disappeared into the horizon, feeling a strange warmth in his chest, a feeling he hadn't known in years. Kindness had brought danger, yes, but it had also brought something else. Connection, purpose, a reminder that even in a harsh world, humanity could still find its way. The night wrapped itself around the ranch like a dark blanket, quiet except for the crackle of the fire and the soft breaths of the 2 giant Apache sisters sitting beside it. Their enormous shadows danced across the ground, stretching and folding with the flames. Caleb Morgan sat across from them, watching as they ate with slow, grateful motions, their hunger finally giving way to calm. Though each woman stood nearly 7 feet tall, filling the night with an undeniable presence, their exhaustion made them seem more human than myth. Caleb saw not warriors, but survivors pulled from the edge of collapse. Despite their towering strength, both sisters carried scars, thin lines across arms, faint bruises on legs, and deeper wounds behind their eyes. Caleb sensed stories behind those marks, battles, losses, long miles through cruel deserts, and when they did, their voices were low, almost gentle. The taller sister, Naira, watched the flames as though searching for memories she wanted to forget. Her younger sister Loma leaned back slightly, shoulders relaxing for the first time that day. Caleb offered more water. They accepted with slight nods, their pride strong but not stubborn. As the fire popped, Naira finally broke the silence. "You risk much feeding strangers," Caleb shrugged. "Risk feels lighter than watching someone starve." She studied him with an unreadable expression, her golden brown eyes flickering in the firelight. "Most men fear what they do not know," she said. He didn't argue. He knew she was right, but he also knew that nothing about their appearance, giant or not, justified leaving them to die. He had lived alone for years, long enough to understand that isolation couldn't be allowed to turn into cruelty. The wind carried faint coyote cries across the plains, but nothing else disturbed the night. Caleb added another log to the fire and leaned back against a barrel. Naira adjusted the blanket he had given her, which looked small against her massive frame. Loma rested her head on her sister's shoulder, exhausted. Caleb felt a strange sense of responsibility settle into him. Not fear, not obligation, but a quiet desire to keep them safe for the night. Their size didn't intimidate him anymore, it only made their vulnerability more striking. Hours passed, and the sisters slowly drifted into intermittent sleep. Caleb remained awake, scanning the dark horizon. Something unsettled him. Not danger, but a feeling that this night was only the beginning of something much greater. He felt it in the stillness, in the silence between breaths. He had offered food out of instinct, but the consequences were unknown. Even so, he didn't regret it. Kindness rarely gave warning before demanding courage, and Caleb had long learned that a man's worth wasn't measured by comfort, but by the choices he made when it mattered. Just before dawn, the fire had burned low, leaving only glowing embers. Caleb rose quietly, stepping out onto the porch to stretch. The morning air was cold, crisp and too still. He inhaled deeply, then stopped. A tremor rippled under his feet, gentle at first, then stronger. And he frowned, listening. Another tremor followed, heavier, rhythmic, unmistakable. His pulse quickened. The sun crept over the ridge, brushing the land with pale gold, and the trembling intensified. Hoofbeats, not a handful, not a dozen, hundreds. Maybe more. The sound deepened until the earth itself seemed to pulse with it. Caleb's breath caught in his throat. From the far edges of the plains, a tidal wave of movement approached, dark, shapes rolling like a storm across the horizon. Dust rose in thick plumes, catching the sunlight like smoke. The rumbling grew louder, sharper, surrounding the ranch like thunder trapped in a circle. Naira and Loma stirred inside. Their instincts were sharper than his. They stepped out of the cabin moments later, towering beside him, eyes narrowed, jaws clenched. "Our people," Naira said with quiet certainty. Caleb swallowed hard. He didn't speak. He couldn't. Within seconds, the riders appeared fully, surging forward in a coordinated formation. 700 Apache warriors, painted, armed, unyielding, closed in around the ranch. Their horses snorted clouds of steam into the morning air. Spears glittered sharp as winter ice. Bows were drawn but not fired. Silence rolled through the circle like a second dawn, heavy and unbroken. Caleb stood frozen at the porch, the small wooden structure feeling absurdly fragile against the sea of warriors surrounding it. Loma stepped closer to him, as though ready to shield him despite her weakened state. A single rider broke from the formation, a broad-shouldered Elde, her adorned with feathers and bone, his presence carrying as much weight as the entire circle around him. He rode his horse forward until he stood directly in front of the porch. The horse stomped the ground, but didn't break its stance. The elder's dark gaze locked onto Caleb, studying him with the precision of a man who had judged countless souls before. His eyes then shifted to Naira and Loma. Relief flickered across his stern features. The sisters lowered their heads respectfully. Naira stepped beside Caleb, her voice deep, steady, resonant. "He gave us food," she said, "when we were starving, when we were weak, when others would have turned away in fear." The warriors murmured among themselves, their expressions a blend of surprise and contemplation. The elder dismounted slowly, his boots sinking into the dust. He approached Caleb with deliberate steps, each one heavy with authority. Caleb didn't step back. He held his ground, palms open at his sides, heart pounding but steady. The elder stopped within arm's reach. "You fed daughters of our tribe," he said, voice aged but powerful. "Few outsiders would offer such a gift." Caleb cleared his throat. "They needed help," he replied. "Anyone with a decent heart would have done the same." Naira shook her head softly. "No, not anyone." The elder's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. In that moment, Caleb realized this was not a confrontation. This was a judgment, not of guilt, but of character. A moment that would ripple far beyond the fire he had built the night before. The elder exhaled slowly and raised one hand. At once, the 700 warriors lowered their weapons in perfect unison. The silence that followed felt like an entire world holding its breath. The elder continued, "A man who shares food during hardship honors the earth and the spirits that watch us. Such honor does not go unnoticed." Caleb blinked, stunned by the words. He had expected anger, punishment, even death, but not this. Respect, recognition, something like gratitude. Loma stepped forward, placing her enormous hand gently on Caleb's shoulder. "Our people do not forget kindness," she murmured. Her voice carried warmth he had not heard the night before. Naira nodded in agreement. "You saved us," she said simply. "Now we stand with you." Warriors began approaching with gifts, pelts, baskets, carved tools, medicine. Caleb felt overwhelmed, unable to speak. The elder placed his palm over his own heart. "Your ranch is under our protection," he declared, "as long as you walk with truth." The warriors echoed the sentiment with a thunderous chant that shook the desert once more, but now with harmony, not threat. As the sun rose fully, the warriors gradually dispersed, riding back across the plains like a retreating tide. Naira and Loma lingered. Before leaving, Naira looked down at Caleb and said softly, "Today, you gained more than safety. You gained a place in our story." Loma smiled faintly, a silent thank you. The sisters turned and followed the riders into the horizon, their massive silhouettes growing smaller against the morning light. Caleb stood alone on the porch, watching until the last dust cloud disappeared. The ranch felt strangely alive now, lighter, fuller, condensed to something larger than the fences that surrounded it. Caleb breathed deeply, feeling a shift inside him that he couldn't name. Dee offered food without expecting anything. Instead, he had gained a bond that stretched far beyond language or fear. His simple act had woven him into a history he never meant to touch, but now carried with quiet pride. And as he stepped back inside, he understood one thing clearly. Kindness had changed his world, and perhaps theirs forever.